Welcome. This is the last in the series of our customer series on unlocking the full value of HYCU on Nutanix. So if anyone doesn't know me, if you haven't not been on a HYCU webinar before with myself, my name is Chris Rogers, and I'm a senior product marketing manager here at HYCU. So I predominantly look after our hybrid cloud section of product. So that would be Nutanix, Azure Stack HCI or Azure Local, the relationship we have with Dell, VMware, those types of platforms. So any questions on those, feel free to hit me up or anything else that HYCU does as well. So I said this was the last in the series, or this is going to be the last in the series. Hopefully, we're going to carry on doing some more of them because I think I found them in particularly useful when I've joined them as a person looking to learn as well. So the first one was cyber resilience, detecting without compromise. The second one was disaster recovery, reducing the TCO by 50%. The last one was complete protection, making sure we expand outside of just VMs for Nutanix workloads. And then today is going to be moving across platforms and clouds with zero locking. So essentially, it's a mobility webinar. So when we look at this mobility, so what's driving the demand for mobility? One of the ones here is increasing costs. That's kind of an obvious one, right? So tighter budgets, other hypervisor vendors increasing their pricing, forcing organizations to make a decision, right? Either slim down your environment to meet your budgets or migrate to an alternative platform. The second one now being is cloud maturity, and that value realization that cloud costs have lowered and lift and shift is now an available option for a lot of customers to run in the cloud. The maturity of alternative hypervisors, exactly like Nutanix and Azure Local, for instance, especially Nutanix, people back maybe 10, 15 years ago Nutanix was thought of as like a startup or a riskier option. VMware was always the safe bet, but now people are migrating in their hundreds and thousands, if not millions, across to platforms like Nutanix from VMware because they are enterprise ready, enterprise grade, and they've proved that over many, many years. So these alternative hypervisors are now capable and sometimes actually have increased benefits with ease of use, ease of management, etc. And the last one for data mobility is AI adoption. We can't go without a webinar or an event without talking about AI in some form. But essentially, cloud platforms or even these on-premises platforms, Nutanix do GPT in a box, for instance, on their platform. People are now mobilizing their data into these platforms purely for the use of AI. Utilizing object storage or unstructured data platforms for data warehousing and Gen AI use cases. That could be the cloud, that could be a hybrid cloud solution as well. So what does that give people? Well, it gives people a few options, right? You can migrate those workloads to alternative hypervisors. You can lift and shift to the cloud. You could potentially do cross-cloud transitions. So if you're an early adopter of cloud and you chose cloud provider A, you could then migrate to cloud provider B potentially. Or you could modernize those applications into newer factors, so into containerizations or even microservices. Or even functions on those cloud platforms. Or the other option is you're an early adopter and actually you're repatriating back from the cloud. You're coming back and saying the cloud didn't really work for these particular workloads. Most organizations now are going to have a hybrid cloud kind of business strategy. There's going to have an element of a hypervisor or maybe more than one hypervisor. And then there's going to have some public cloud. There's going to be some modern public cloud with functions and things like database as a service or platform as a service. And then they're probably going to have a combination of SaaS applications as well. And that pretty much is the relatively standard adoption we see across the marketplace. Some people are going to have, a much higher density of Nutanix, for instance, and a smaller footprint in public cloud, and then loads in SaaS. Some are going to have less in SaaS, more in public cloud, and less on premises. But typically, we do see customers having, a finger in all of those different areas as well, and a strategy across all of those. But why does mobility become so difficult? Well, obviously there's the technical challenges. Typically tools are complex or error prone. The process that we have to go through to migrate platforms, sometimes they take months, years, sometimes even multi-year migrations occur, and sometimes they never actually finish. By the time they've actually migrated, the hardware's out of renewal, and they're now deciding on another strategy, or the CTO has changed and they're now changing strategy. If they have an agent-based migration, that agent has to get signed off by security. It's lengthy to deploy. It's very hard to manage and scale across, especially a large enterprise environment. And you've got some organizations that have then hardware dependencies. So if you're looking at, data protection vendors, for instance, that have hardware dependencies, lifting and shifting into the cloud, well, suddenly you've still got this data protection on premise that you're now going to sweat the asset for, and you've got to then repatriate data back down if you want to back it up. It just doesn't feel that relevant and that kind of that modern to do that in that way anymore. And then you've got operational interruptions, right? How do we migrate this data without causing the business to fail or slow down or even lose function anyway? And then come the business challenges, right? These are all the technical ones and how hard it is to actually physically do this. But then you've got the business then holding a ransom and saying, well, actually, we can't afford to have any revenue loss. So if the migration is going to be costly from a business revenue perspective, we can't go ahead. The businesses may have made a decision to have a vendor lock-in approach, or they may have not realized that the strategy they placed last time locked them into a particular vendor. We've seen this many, many, many times in organizations, not realizing that the decisions they make 3, 4, 5 years ago is going to affect their future strategy so drastically. And then we've got the high costs, so it's a line item on on a budget, and if that budget isn't there to be able to provide the migration services, then it's not going to go ahead. And it's obviously time consuming finding the people and resources to do that. And then if there is any downtime, the massive reputational damage that can come with that as well. So I want to just run you through a customer story. So this is something that we came across, and well, I won't spoil it for the end, but then we've managed to help this customer along their journey as well. But their requirements were quite specific and quite lengthy. So when you look at their needs, they were migration to and from VMware. They were running Azure Stack HCI in Azure and Azure Government and AWS Gov Cloud for different sites, all in parallel. And they required mobility to, from, and between all these physical, logical, and cloud sites. And then what they thought about was, well, how do we unify data protection across all of those? Because they're all very different in the way they do everything, right? The public cloud to VMware to a Microsoft stack to a Nutanix stack, completely different experience. The way that it integrates, the way that data protection is done, the way that even mobility is done across all those platforms is completely different. And they had to have minimal disruption. They couldn't have workloads being down for a weekend whilst they migrated between those platforms, right? And this wasn't a one-off migration. This was something they wanted to do on a regular basis and actually migrate workloads to the best platform depending on the requirements they had. And when they looked around and they, figured out this was their requirements, or this was their wants, if you will. You want the wants and the needs, but this was their wants on that wish list. Then when they looked at the reality, that meant realistically it was going to be skyrocketing migration costs. It was going to be incredibly expensive to do that on a consistent basis. They realized that tooling in place already, or the app, or even specific tooling in the marketplace, were only between specific infrastructures. So there was a tool that did VMware to AWS or a VMware to Azure and maybe back again, but there wasn't a tool that did all of them. There was a tool that did between clouds, and so suddenly you add in 3, 4, 5 different tools, and it becomes incredibly complex. And then when you add, if they wanted to add future sites in the future, there was no future proofing. And then they had the problem of the time as well. How do we find the resource and the time and spiraling costs? Even if they were going to hire a third party to try and do that, it's going to be incredibly expensive. And then, fortunately, they found HYCU. So HYCU providing infrastructure and cloud freedom and protection. And what does that mean? I know it's a load of buzzwords on the screen, but so infrastructure and cloud freedom and protection. So that is essentially, giving the infrastructure and cloud. So we've discussed the multi-cloud strategy and the hybrid cloud strategy, giving customers complete freedom and complete control, whilst also giving them protection of their data at the same time. So HYCU isn't just a migration tool. It isn't just a backup tool. You can combine those capabilities into a single tool, into a single platform that then can provide value across multiple different use cases. So suddenly when you add that into the equation, we start to look like an incredibly powerful piece of software. So when you have things like cross-hypervisor recovery and cross-cloud recovery, and even then to and from public cloud, suddenly you unlock all of these ways of working. So we can go from AWS to Azure, for instance. We can then go from Azure to GCP. We can go GCP back down to Nutanix. We can go VMware to Nutanix. We can go VMware to public cloud, we can you can see the myriad of options we have available to us, all being enabled via HYCU. Natively, these platforms don't talk, don't integrate, and don't really work well together, because if you took them as their individual entities, they're essentially competitors, right? If you're running workload on Google, you're not running it on Azure, and if you're running it on AWS, you're not running it on Azure or Google. And the same for VMware and Nutanix, etc. So they don't want to make mobility particularly easy. But here at HYCU, we understand that data freedom, data sovereignty, and data control is incredibly important. That's why we don't ever sell storage, for instance. We don't want to lock people into a platform that holds their data and storage hostage on a proprietary or commoditized piece of hardware. We give you complete control, complete market freedom to go and store your data and mobilize that data wherever you want. So that could be in AWS, that could be in Azure, that could be in GCP, that could be on Dell, it could be on Nutanix, it could be on VMware. We don't mind, right? We're here for the customer and not for the vendors. So what does that unlock for us? So application-centric mobility, so cross-hypervisor migration, disaster recovery to and from the cloud. We can enable people to lift and shift to the cloud if needed. We can then also protect modern cloud services such as PaaS and DBaaS services. So when you start looking at the workloads that we do actually cover beyond Nutanix, when you start migrating and having a multi-cloud strategy, you're going to start looking at things like maybe AWS Lambda or AWS IAM, for instance, or Terraform, and those types of platforms where realistically you didn't realize you needed to protect, but now suddenly all of your functions live in Lambda, all of your infrastructure as code lives in Terraform. And if you don't have backups on that, your cloud strategy can potentially fall apart. And then we even have cross-regional recovery in the cloud. So customers who want to have a big estate, but they don't want to have a duplication of data and duplication of workload, right? So they're going to have a big Azure or a big AWS or a big GCP estate, for instance, or even a huge Nutanix cluster, or two, or three, or five. But replicating data between regions or between clusters, something we can also do for you. So being able to then bring that data up on a completely different region inside the same cloud provider, giving you that benefit of having a third-party protection, we can take it off the cloud. We can also provide recovery back into a different region if that region's down. And the last one being their cloud repatriation. You are seeing a lot of customers start to think about this for particular workloads, especially maybe even AI workloads when they've got large data sets, incredibly expensive to potentially store in the public cloud, and they have got object storage on premises. So for instance, in a Nutanix objects cluster, for instance, and they've already bought the compute, they've already bought the storage, they can bring and repatriate their data down, crunch it, inference it, whatever they need to do with it on premise, and then potentially put it back up into the cloud for data warehousing or whatever it might be. And that unlocks seamless mobility. So application-centric migrations all through the UI, incredibly easy, incredibly seamless to do. I was doing a demo on another webinar with one of my colleagues, Marco, and essentially we managed to boil down cross-hypervisor migration and disaster recovery to the cloud into essentially just a drop-down box. So you go into your recovery workflow, you say where do you want to recover it to, and you drop it down. You say VMware, or from Nutanix to VMware, or Nutanix to Azure Local. So we've taken all that complexity out of the product and put it into a drop-down box. And the same for disaster recovery to the cloud. We've got a particular button that says spin up to cloud. Press the button, put some details in about which cloud you want to go to, and away you go. Right? And this is purpose built. It was built into the platform, built into the core of HYCU. So there wasn't any retrofitting. There isn't any additional bolt-ons or anything else you need to worry about. It's just, hey, if you've got HYCU running on Nutanix, guess what? This comes as part of the package. You can lift and shift workloads to the cloud. You can do disaster recovery to the cloud. You can do cross-hypervisor migration. And also, whilst you're doing that, we keep your data backed up and protected. So we're not just a migration tool. So we're not just being able to refactor your data from a Nutanix instance into an AWS EC2 instance. We're actually going to keep backing up this data until it's up in the cloud. And then once it's up in the cloud, we can back it up and recover it back down to on-premise if you want. So always making sure we have the customer in mind and the data is protected at all times. So let's look at that customer again. So we kind of mentioned here before high migration costs and high service costs, right? So if they went with a third party or went with another vendor, they were going to have to engage professional services from that vendor or look at a third party integrator to help them with this. It was just too complex, too hard to do. They would only be able to migrate between specific infrastructures. So they would be able to migrate between VMware and Nutanix. They'd be able to migrate between VMware and Azure. But between Azure Government and AWS GovCloud, they wouldn't be able to migrate. Between AWS and GovCloud and VMware, they couldn't migrate, right? So there was very particular workflows and very particular ways they could utilize other tooling to get some of the same workflows and some of the same availability of platform, but not all of them. So, they were very limited in a very complex matrix of this workload could move from here to here using this tool, and if we use this tool, it could go from this place to this place. But if it lives in this place, it can't go anywhere else but here because the tool doesn't support. So you can see how complicated that just becomes just from even trying to map out what goes where and what's supported. And then they had new sites. They had a question over what happened if they implemented new sites, maybe in GCP or maybe in other places in the future. But what currently as it stood, unless they deployed something that was supported by the current tools, they wouldn't have any any mobility. They would have to go back to market and look for another tool or another set of services to do that. And then guess what? They're left with multiple disparate tools for varying different workloads for their various different platforms. Becomes incredibly messy, incredibly complicated. You're licensing things 3, 4, 5 times for essentially the same workload or the same tool. And then they found HYCU. So they've managed to consolidate down into a single tool across their entire hybrid cloud environments. So VMware, Nutanix, Azure Government, AWS GovCloud, Azure Stack HCI or Azure Local as it's called now. All of these are fully supported. And then in the future, they've got GCP, they've got VMware, they've got all these other places they can add to, and more to come as well. They've simplified their discovery and their migration workflows. So using patented application discovery, they know exactly what's on all of their servers and all their virtual machines, and they know they can move them to wherever they need them to. So if they want to move all of their SQL machines, for instance, into Azure because it's going to be beneficial for licensing, they know exactly what's on all of their virtual machines, and they can move them with a click of a button to Azure if they wanted to. And then that unlocks the ability to move any time across platform without the issues and those business issues we discussed earlier with downtime and revenue impact and reputational damage, all those things, because it's built to do this. It is built to give customers freedom and flexibility across all of their workflows. So this is going to be a short session today. This is all I wanted to cover for today. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat now. Hopefully you kind of got a taste of what HYCU can do to unlock your data freedom and your data mobility. Let us know if there's any questions. I've really enjoyed doing a few of these series of webinars in a customer series. So let us know again in the comments or in the chat, or even if you've got an account rep or your customer success managers or whoever else you come across in the HYCU ecosystem. Let them know if you've enjoyed them. Let you know if there's any particular topics you'd like covered in the future, because I think it's something we're going to try and repeat in the future. We've had a really good turnout, really good registration rate for them, so we're really pleased that people are finding value in them. So if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them in. And if you'd like a demo of any of the bits and pieces that we've discussed today, or any of the ones that previously came, so anything from cyber resilience to disaster recovery to the cloud to protecting more, so things like Nutanix files or Nutanix objects or NC2 or NDB, for instance, any of those workloads you want to find out a bit more, you want someone to run you through how we can do it, schedule a demo on the screen, scan the QR code, and then and go from there. So I'm just going to see if there's any questions in the chat. Oh yeah, in the chat there is also the link to get the demo as well. So if you can't scan the QR code, if you go open the chat, you'll see that there. Perfect. I'll just wait a few more minutes. I don't see any questions right now. So I'll just wait a couple minutes because some people may be overthinking or typing them out. So just give me a few more minutes and then and if not, we'll close out the session. One question coming. Yep. So I guess all the other customer series are available on demand as well. So if you go to hycu.com, navigate to resources and find the content library, you'll find all of them there. So if you have missed them or this is the only one you've managed to join, you'll be able to find them all there. Is there an expiration date on the previous recordings? So no, again, they should be all available online on our website. unless we take it down for any reason, but I don't see a reason why we would be taking it down. So no, you should be able to access them for as long as they live. Um, any local sandbox can be used for testing. Yeah, absolutely. So you can do testing into any of those places. So you can keep your virtual machines running in, let's say, Nutanix, and you can test in any other sandbox. So you can test up into GCP, you can test up into Azure, AWS, VMware, whatever it may be. A very, very popular use case for us at the moment is customers are on VMware looking to move to an alternative hypervisor. So a lot of them are moving to Nutanix. We're protecting them whilst they happen. Migrating, either using HYCU or even Nutanix Move, depending on what they prefer, and then reprotecting them afterwards. And actually, HYCU can test those workloads before the migration takes place. So we can spin up a clone into Nutanix and make sure they come up okay, make sure they test without actually impacting the production workloads as well. Perfect. So I think that's all the questions that, yeah, someone's put in there. I really enjoyed the workshops. Look forward to other workshops we're going to provide. Yeah, me too. I've really, really enjoyed presenting on them and having listened to some of my colleagues present as well. I've learned a few things as well, which has been very, very helpful. So hopefully you keep looking out for your emails. We do like to run webinars and inform all of our customers about what's coming out and maybe some underutilized features or functions or some hidden secrets of Haiku. So keep an eye out for in your emails. They'll be coming out at some point in the future. So thank you all for joining. Thank you for your time, and we'll see you all on the next one. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.